I thank Lucka for the introduction. But I think she did not tell you, although I do not speak Slovak, so I'm just guessing from what she told me before, what she would say, is that I am an academic developer, but I'm a political scientist turned into an academic developer. So if I use a few examples which come from my own practice, and it's from political science, it's for that reason, okay? I really appreciate that you've come today. And for some of you, it will be, I think, in 2 weeks, the second session on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. The good news for you is that I'm going to go about it completely differently than last time. And for those who probably haven't had a session on Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, well, it's going to be new for them. If anyone's expecting me to give you ideas of what kind of innovations to do in your classroom, you might be a little disappointed. But what I can help you today with the presentation is figuring out of what kind of innovation would fit your circumstances and how to evaluate or assess whether your innovation is actually working. So that's what I can promise for today. But let's start and actually figure out what the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is. It's actually being practiced for quite a long time, but it was Boyer who in 1990 put kind of a label on it and distinguished it from other kind of research. Basically, he said there are 4 different kind of scholarship or research. One is the scholarship of discovery, which is basically what you normally know as research in your field. So when you're basically trying to get new knowledge for the sake of new knowledge. I think that's probably the most common one that we think of it, or what we think of. Then there's a scholarship of integration, when we're trying to bring in different elements, perhaps from different fields, and kind of organize it in a way that it produces new knowledge. Now, it could be something like a multidisciplinary research, but if you're writing a literature review on a field, on a topic, that could also count as a scholarship of integration if it organizes the literature in a way that it reveals some new things, maybe gaps in the literature, for example. That's the most usual thing. And then there's the scholarship of application, when whatever you do during your scientific work, you try to apply it to real life, whether you're going and helping save the planet or educate people in less fortunate communities, it could all be part of those. And then Boyer said that the scholarship of teaching and learning, which basically research into your own teaching. And partly that's also means it's a research into your students' learning. Okay? Because we're not just interested of how we teach. The most important thing, right, is how our students learn. So we're going to look at now how this scholarship of teaching and learning kind of comes together, how this looks, and how I think the most practical to go about it. Some of you already seen this definition, not with the bold letters, okay? And this is a bit of, I would say it's frightening in some ways because it's extremely long, right? But let me just read it up. The scholarship of teaching and learning, which is commonly abbreviated as SOTL, is the faculty's systematic inquiry into their own teaching, which originates from challenges of teaching and learning, measures teaching methods' impact on students' learning, while it relies on research methods that fit both the subject of inquiry and the expertise of the researcher, and concludes with reflections on the results with an intention to improve both teaching and learning and to make the knowledge public. Okay? Now everyone's had this like, oh, research, inquiry, methods, public, okay? So why I highlighted those 4 things is basically because I thought, let's start with those. Let's start from where it usually starts, is your teaching and your students' learning, okay? So I kind of highlighted these 4 issues: teaching and learning challenge, teaching method, impact on student learning, and reflection. And in the definition, reflection is kind of somewhere in the end. But what I would like to do is to start with reflection. Because what the definition says is basically, when you know whether your analyzed teaching method works, you should reflect. But usually you come up with an innovation through reflecting as well. So it kind of begins and ends with reflection. Okay? So what I would like you to do is to raise your hand if you left the classroom anytime feeling that the class went really well. Excellent. Okay? And I'm particularly thinking about your own teaching. So all of us kind of, not systematically, but we all kind of reflect on how our teaching went. We just really don't have much. Raise your hand if you left the classroom feeling that it was not going as expected. Right? All of those happen to us, right? Sometimes it goes really well, sometimes it's not really going well. Now the question is, have you thought about why? Why did it go well and why did it not go well? Okay? We're sometimes very happy when something goes well and say, you're not interested anymore. But if you know why it went well, you might also have some insights why on other times it didn't go as well. Okay? So instinctively, we all reflect on our teaching. Some people more, some people less. But the difference between this kind of reflection and the reflection that can be connected to subtle is basically that is a reflection based on research, okay, systematic research. Okay? And then we're going to look into it a little bit more deeply. Now, let's look at the impact on student learning. So why do we teach? Okay, that's actually very important that you like what you do. But why else? Why do you teach?
We want to help our students to learn.
Thank you, right? Any much you like teaching, the most important part of your teaching is that someone learns from it. Otherwise, you could just go and, have public speaking without any interest whether people learn. No, the question is, do they really learn? Okay? How much do they learn? And how well do they learn? Okay? And that's the more difficult thing, because it's not enough to go there and, I had a really nice lecture today. I even had very nice group work for them, or a simulation or whatever, but did they really learn what I wanted them to learn? Okay? And so that's the most important thing. And that's where everything basically starts, and that's when I link to the teaching and learning challenge. If things didn't go as well as you expected, meaning students didn't learn as much as well, or I would also say they might have learned, but you have no idea, because they couldn't exactly demonstrate that they know what they know. Then you have some sort of a teaching and learning challenge, okay? And then you start thinking about what is the reason for it? Why did these students not learn or couldn't demonstrate that they learned? And then you start thinking about maybe there's something in the way I teach. Maybe it doesn't fit the students as well. Maybe it doesn't fit the actual topic as well. Maybe there's nothing wrong with what I do in the classroom. But there's something wrong in how I assess their learning, right? If I frontally lecture and then tell them to memorize the textbook, and then I'm going to have group work assigned as a final project, it might not work as well as I probably run a multiple choice test. No, I don't encourage you to only lecture in your classroom, assign the textbook, and have a multiple choice at the end. But if your class components are not aligned, it could be also a problem. And it might be the case of they don't learn, it's just that you don't know that they learned, because you're not measuring in the right way. All right. Think of a concrete topic, concept, skill, or whatever that you're teaching that your student did not learn as well as you'd like. I'm thinking pick one specific thing. So, but for me it was an issue, and then why I ended up actually writing my first solo study is it bugged me that I'm teaching foreign policy analysis. I thought it's fascinating, you know, how decision makers think. And all that came through basically from the students that, nah, these politicians are all corrupt, they know everything, they have all the resources, all their decisions should be perfect. If they are not, they are certainly deliberately wrong or screwing it up or, you know, want to harm someone. I said, yes, there are bad people, but not every politician knows everything and, you know, an evil, on one aspect, a Superman, right, because he can do everything, but also an evil Superman, right, because he doesn't want to do good things, okay? And then came other things. So think of one of these topics and spend 1 or 2 minutes discussing it with the person sitting next to you, behind you, in front of you. So please. Or if you want to move closer to other people, if you already wrote a subtle study like Lenko did, you can come up with a new topic. I know, I'm sure your teaching is great, but unfortunately there's always something we can improve on. And feel free to have the discussion in Slovak. So. Do we have someone who would like to share their teaching challenge with us? Do we have anyone who would like to share their teaching challenge with us, please?
All of us spoke about the feedback part of our for teaching and learning, because we usually we didn't think it before that it was more important than the content of the lecture, but more important it was for us to kind of have a feedback on it later, to know like how much of the learning was actually like how much of it came through the student. And it's very important to kind of assess the scope of how well they understood, because something, you know, especially when you have like a feedback activity at the end to repeat, it's usually like group activity. You get the right answer, but you don't know the full scope of understanding. So for us, that was the biggest challenge to kind of assess how much of it they actually understood, and to kind of see how much each student understood, because usually you just get like an overall picture, not like each student.
Anyone else? All right. Have you thought about why, right, your teaching challenge is a challenge, right? What's behind it, right? Sometimes you think, my students don't learn, right? But why? And then you get to this point of why I think they don't learn, right? If your answer is they are lazy, but we're not, you know, progressing because we don't have a cure for laziness, but if your reason is that they are not motivated, right? We're already kind of going one step further and said, okay, so what can be done to make them be motivated? Okay? And so think about it. Do I take the best approach to teaching? And that could be also assessing students. So it's not only, again, what's happening in the classroom. Maybe it's actually a wonderful approach and it works very well teaching another topic. Okay? But does it work very well for this one? If the answer is probably no, right, you start thinking about, and that's the other part of it, you start thinking about what can I do instead? Okay? Now, and there that takes us to your teaching method. It might be a drastic change, it might be a tiny change, but if you really want to be able to evaluate whether the change that you made works, you want basically to make one change or one modification that may have more than one component, but it can be understood as one thing. Because if you change the method of assessment at the same time as you're completely revamping what's happening in your classroom, and at the end of the day, you don't know what changed. So it's the basic rule of research. You're changing too many things. You don't know which variable was impactful and which one was not. All right, so teaching method. What can I do differently that helps students to learn better or demonstrate their knowledge better? And then you have to really think about that particular topic or that particular skill or that thing that you're teaching. Okay? Now discuss with your colleague, thinking about your teaching challenge that you just mentioned. Maybe a way that you teach about the challenging concept, skill, etc., and brainstorm at what could be done instead. There's no limit, so you can come up with anything. In fact, I think the best thing is when you have more than one ideas and it takes some time for you to come to a conclusion of which one would be better. If you can help each other. You share your teaching challenges and you can kind of help each other to figure out, what can be done about it. Maybe it's not what you will do, but think about it. All right, let's return to the plenary, okay? And raise your hand if you have some idea what can be done now about your teaching challenge. Nobody has any ideas? You don't have to tell me what it is. You just have to raise your hand if you have some ideas what can be done.
Different, maybe easier, so try to find something that might be more suitable to the group that you have.
Right, and then you need to know what's more suitable thing is, right? So you have to come up with some new teaching method or your new assessment method, or do something actually. The assessment could be actually a very fine assessment, but you realize that I want them to write essays, make presentations. But I never really told them how to write essays or how to make presentations. Okay? Maybe if I actually tell them, it's not that they are lacking research skills or not that they don't know how to write, they would know how to write, or they would know how to stand in front of a group of people and make a decent presentation, but I forgot to tell them what are the important things about it. So that could be your teaching innovation as well. Whatever the new thing that you're going to try in your classroom is your teaching innovation. Teaching innovation is something that people don't really like as a word or kind of get scared from it because innovation, right? It's big, wise people who are doing innovations. Teaching innovation is, how I define it, is something new that you do in your own teaching. It's not reforming the field of academic development, not reforming the field of teaching political science. It's just trying something new in your practice that possibly have a better impact on student learning. Okay? So that's going to be our definition for the teaching innovation. And I was asked by Lucka to have a brief, about 5-minute break so that you can enjoy the refreshments. Okay, so let's do that. Feel free to grab something, start munching on it. If you want to bring it back and munch during the second half of the presentation, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to have a 5-minute quick break. So we're at the point when you know what you would like to do, right? You have your idea of a teaching innovation, but how do you know that it has a chance to work other than you think it might? Okay, so when I had all of these disinterested, or rather strange students with strange concept of decision makers, I had this epiphany one day playing board games with my friends. Okay, sitting there and thinking, I have no idea what these other people, make us a decision on the board. I think we were playing the Game of Thrones, the board game, right? There's a lot of battles going on it. You have to figure out, what's the best move to make. So you know, it's exactly what my students should be doing. They would understand that kind of uncertainty in decision making, incomplete information, not to mention, of course, that decision makers might have headaches too, and they still need to make a decision, even if that day they felt really, really bad. So I said, okay, this sounds like a great idea. I have some idea how to organize this, but has this been done before? Is this really something that's going to work? So what can you do, right? You can help and make an innovation that is informed by the literature. Go and look up if it was done. If it's very general, you probably have to narrow it down in some ways, focusing on, for example, your discipline or a certain aspect of that issue or the teaching issue. You have to find that concept of teaching and learning from the literature that's most relevant to inform what you do. Right? If you identified your challenge well, and what you want to do, most likely it's there. So basic idea is that whenever you do research, you have to look into literature. This is the same thing. But you're kind of, because you're not a natural academic developer, right? You're just interested in improving your teaching. It might also be helpful for you to learn more about concepts and what other people's found, how this thing that I think would work, they already researched an aspect of it. And they said that if this happens, then this will happen. Oh, well, that sounds kind of like what I do. So here I go. This is what I expect. This is why my students will learn better at the end. Okay? Now I have my innovation. I'm ready to do it. But I would like to know if this works. Okay? Well, so, and that's where the scholarship part of SODL comes in. Okay? Because what I just talked before, anyone can do it, and there's no really scholarship much involved. Okay? So here comes scholarship, and so we're back to our extremely frighteningly long definition, and I highlighted different, three different issues, and then of course reflection is coming back because reflection is a very important skill when you're a teacher. Okay, so what I highlighted for you is systematic inquiry, research methods, going public, and reflection. Systematic inquiry is basically means that you plan a research around your innovation. Right? So it's not an ad hoc basis of I go in and ask students, oh, did you like it? Oh, nice. So I know this one student liked it. Wonderful, but I have 150. Okay, so what do I do now? So basically, you plan a research to measure the impact of your teaching. It's important that you focus on one aspect of your teaching, and that's the innovation. Because sometimes we go in and I want to ask a bunch of other questions that we're really interested, but it's not helping us evaluating what we are doing. So if you're changing your assessment method, maybe whether students enjoy your classroom is not very exciting or not very informative. It's good to know, right? And if you want to say that the issue is not that my classes are boring, so no one learns anything and the assessment can't work, right? Then you can say, okay, I asked students in a general question, they said, oh, they really enjoy this class, etc., etc. But this is kind of a side issue. This is not going to help you know whether your innovation works. Okay? An important consideration that we often forget is that our subjects are students. Okay? And there comes the question, if I want to do a research and I think about publishing that research, do I need to have approval by the ethics committee? Some journals actually want you to show your approval for the research with live subjects. Not all, but some of them. It's important to figure out if you don't get it before you actually go into measuring your innovation. You're like, oh, I have this bunch of beautiful data. Everything comes together nicely, but I really have a difficulty to finding the journal that doesn't want an approval by an ethics committee. Now, it's not that common in Central Europe yet, but the university has an ethics committee, and you can actually go and do it if you want. Not all journals require it either, but you have to be sure if you want to publish in your disciplinary journal that actually is really big on also teaching issues, whether you need to worry about this. When I did my board gaming thing, of course I needed approval by an ethics committee. The fun stuff was that I can normally do whatever I want in my classroom, I mean, within reasonable limits. But once you get an ethics approval, and that was in the United States, in Michigan, they limited actually what you could do in your teaching. So some of us said, it makes no sense, right? Because I want to measure how my teaching works, not to be told how to teach. But this is a minor issue, and I think there are differences in how strict the ethics committee is. Normally, it shouldn't be an issue, and I think whatever you do here can be as strenuous as you had to do at Saginaw Valley State University. In fact, it is a teaching school. It's a liberal arts college, and professors don't do social studies at all, because they don't want to go through the ethics procedure. Okay, now, so what do you really need to have is a research design to know how to go about your research. You have a research design, whatever you're researching anyways, right? But we don't really think that comprehensively about our own teaching when we're evaluating. So I put you the most common ones on the slide, but there are other ways to go about it. Usually some comparative measure is useful because you can compare it, what you did before and what you do now. So that can tell you whether this works better than what you did before. It's unlikely that it works so well that there's not one student who gets a, I don't know, F or an E or a D in the classroom. So you really need to know whether it's actually an improvement on what you did before. Are the students learning more now? A pre-post study is basically, would be looking at what the students did before and then having the actual innovation, or if you want to get bigger words, experiment, and then seeing what goes after, or what happens. So basically, before you ask a bunch of questions about whatever you're teaching, this is what the students know, you do your thing, and at the end of the day, you ask very much the same questions, and then you figure out, if there's a change, and hopefully a positive one, then in between that I did something, that's probably the reason for it. Okay? That's a very crude version of saying of a pre-post setup, but that's basically the idea. Comparing what they knew before you started to teach with what they know after it. It's particularly, I think, exciting when you're teaching skills, like when they memorizing things. It's they learn this little, they will know more. I think it's more exciting when you do something skill related. You can do something which we call quasi-experimental. It's quasi because the selection of students into groups is not random. But what you can do, and what I did, is that I couldn't do a pre-post study because what I really needed to know is that this method of teaching that usually happens compared to this new board gaming method is better or worse. But I have not taught that class at that university before. So I can compare it to another university, but that's probably too big a difference. So, but I had several sections of the same class, right? So I said, this group will be the treatment group, and this one will be the control group, right? In the control group, I do old stuff, and in the treatment group, I try this board gaming. And that's basically your quasi-experimental setup. It has some ethical considerations, because if you're so convinced that the new method is so much better, then it's a question whether you really want to teach according to the old method. But I always say, if you're doing, a study into it, you're probably not 100% convinced, right? It's also a question whether you can reasonably sell it to your students, because some ones will say that, okay, but I'm not doing what my friend does. You teach her basically it's the same class, just I'm coming in Monday mornings and he's coming in Monday evenings, so, right? But I didn't seem to have an issue with that either. But for that, you have to know your students. Okay? So think about whether one of these research designs work well for you or something else, right? It also depends, and I'm slowly moving into it, what is the subject of your inquiry? What is your innovation? And what is your research skills, right? You're probably not going to do a pre-post study, or even if you have absolutely no statistical skills. You perhaps can do some sort of qualitative analysis as well, but that's less popular, I would say, less often done, not impossible to do. Okay? So let's look at what do we do with our research methods. So what is actually something popular in the field of academic development, and particularly in subtle paper, is the idea of data triangulation. It's not necessarily a triangle of saying 3 different kinds of data, but the idea is that you use different kinds of data that tap into the same issue, that are all in one way can evaluate that innovation. And if they are all saying the same thing, then it's more likely that you actually not just have a fluke results because that one single source, say a student questionnaire, was really positive, right? So the question is what other data you can use. Now, the bigger problem is what data do you need, okay? So the first issue is I would need this kind of data to evaluate my innovation. Okay? But can I get that kind of data? If you cannot directly get that data, you have to figure it out. What other ways of looking at this thing can give me information that's good or good enough for my purposes, right? You can get into the head of your students, but you can ask them questions. So, all right, let's think about our data a little. What kind of data can you get? Who can you get data from? Right? If you want to measure student learning, probably a very good source of data are students. What kind of data can you get from students?
Surveys.
You can do surveys. You can do minute papers at the end of your classes. You can have them write something if that's how you need to measure what you need to measure. You can have interviews. You can have focus group interviews. You can look at the assignments. Okay. So you have a written assignment at the beginning of the class, how they look. You figure out what will be your assessment points. You have to know that. You assess that writing, and then you look at the writing at the end of the course. So, okay, this was skill development. I wanted them to learn how to write a research paper. Do they know? Are they better now? They probably will not, be masters yet after a course, but are they better now? Okay. So, but what I would caution against is that all your information is like just student assignment. Okay. You can use student grades or parts of student grades as well, if you want. But let's have some other perspective on it. What other source you can have? Other than the students, of course. How can the colleague help you? They can come, observe your class, and share their opinion. And if you do it in an organized way, it produces some sort of output. That can be protocol filled out. That can be a discussion about which you take notes, right? But you have some information from another source about how this particular teaching went. And that's actually important because the students can be not necessarily biased, but their opinion is also influenced by what grade they expect to get in the class. You probably heard about end of semester student evaluations and related issues, right? You can be biased. Of someone who is very positive will probably come away and say, no, it went quite well, you know? And those who are less or more pessimistic actually will say, oh, no, it's not going as well as I wanted. So there's a colleague who points out that maybe holistically, right, it's not exactly what you expect, but that particular thing that you're interested in actually is going great. And then he can pinpoint of how great, okay? But there's another way to do it. She can also say, you wanted to have more active students. So she can come in and say, you know, just count the number of times student actually contributed to the classroom. For you, it's difficult because you're leading the classroom. Of course, you can try doing it, and sometimes we do, but there's that. How else can you get data? You're there in the classroom. Okay. The important thing would be that the data that you collect is not just random something. We often suggest a teaching journal, which you kind of come up with questions for yourself of what you think you need to know about this innovation. And then you go and after the classroom, kind of fill it out and put down your observations. It works even if you're just innovating in one single classroom, right? One single session. But it works best when something is going on throughout the semester. And so you want to have data class after class after class. And once you have all of this, later you can come back and do some kind of an analysis. Whether it's a qualitative analysis or you're turning your sentences somehow into some other kind of data, that's up to you. But that's your observation, basically. And that could be important as well. But in itself, it's not sufficient, I'd say. So now we have our data, abundance of data from all sources. But before we actually want to collect that data, we have to think about it. I really want a comparative study of service. Do I have the statistical skill to do it? Okay. If I don't, if you're doing it for a class, like some of you actually do it, I told you not to actually do it because you don't have the time to learn the method. But how about recruiting a colleague, maybe if you end up writing a paper as a co-author who has the skill? You just have to provide the data, okay? And then muse about why it's working and not working. How can I kind of, I'm not good at statistics, but I can do limited statistical analysis. All of you can. Frequencies and percentages are statistics, okay? So that can be something that you can do even if you don't have high-level statistical skills. Oh, but I'm really good at qualitative analysis, discourse analysis. So can I generate those kind of data that will also be relevant for the subject of my study, okay? So you have to bring together what you need to evaluate your innovation and what you can do. Okay. Right. Now think about what kind of research training you have and what data sources work best with your training. Okay. And then discuss it with your colleague just as you did before. Okay? So for me it was easy actually because I'm trained in statistics, so a comparative study partially based on surveys worked very well for me. But I probably would have had more of a difficult time to do a discourse analysis, for example. All right, go ahead. Who's going to use qualitative methods most likely? Okay. How about quantitative? How about both? Okay, so someone wants to use mixed methods. That's very good, actually. If you have the skills, that's probably best. So, and that's actually also possible. There are things that are fairly easy to learn or to train yourself, and that's worth doing. If you have to take 2 years of statistics class to do this just one study, that's probably more than you can afford time-wise. Okay. All right, now let's assume you have your innovation, you collected your data, you run your analysis on the data, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. Okay? And then you have your findings. You have to figure out, of course, what all of these things mean, and we're kind of back to reflection. Okay? So first you have to figure out whether the innovation worked. But sometimes the answer is more complicated than that. Sometimes it's partially it worked, but that other aspect that I thought would work really well wasn't going as well. It worked for certain students, but it didn't work for all the students. The innovation actually worked, but it revealed this other shortcoming in student learning that now I will have to do something about it. Okay? And that's actually when you're kind of approaching the end of your study and your end of your subtle paper. Right? It's not simply having an innovation, it's not simply doing a research, but reflecting on those findings. Okay? If something didn't work as well, think about why. Those who attended my other subtle presentation 2 weeks ago, they already know that sometimes the finding is actually very revealing because the innovation for one of the authors worked perfectly, except the causal mechanism that she thought was there wasn't exactly the way that she expected it. And what does this mean? The innovation worked, but this contributed new knowledge in a way that we also believed before that this is how it works. And now we know that, oh, actually, it works, but not for that reason that we thought. And that's a very important contribution, actually. So some people think that, oh, this is a negative finding. No, this is a very exciting finding. Sometimes when you have other findings than you expected, well, if you write your paper, the English language publishing industry doesn't like surprises. But you often find things that you didn't expect to be there, and then you have to muse why. Okay? Now, are you going to use this innovation again in your classroom? It worked, so yeah, probably. It didn't exactly work 100%, so will you still use it with some modifications? What do you plan to do? Okay, what's going to be the adaptation? Or will you try something else because it didn't really work as well as you expected? And that's important to say, you not stick to something that you love but didn't work. Or you might say, it actually didn't work because of the profile of the students that I probably weren't as careful about as I should have been. You know? If these were more motivated students, then it would work. So if you end up with a class of more motivated students, maybe you can try it again. But in the meantime, let's go back and find some other method for those who are not as motivated. Will you try it in another course? Right? Apply it to another issue or for another body of students. If so, are adaptations needed? Right? This worked very well in my small seminar of 10 people. Next semester, I will have 25. Can I still do this? Okay. And here, I also would like to consider your own situation. Quite often we say, oh, but the students need it. Yes, but will you survive the semester? Right? And that's important too, because if you put yourself into a situation that is not healthy for you, at the end of the day, the students will suffer as well, even if you don't want to. Okay? So reflection is very important. But there's one last thing to do, going public. Okay? You're not doing this research for your own fun only, or for your drawer, which we know loves unfinished research papers. But you do it that you can share the knowledge. You may only share the knowledge with your colleagues in your department, teaching the same thing, or taking the same innovative teaching course. Okay? But you do share it with someone. Now, if you want to go one step further, you take your paper and present it at a conference. If you want a bit of a feedback because you're stuck, probably you're not fully understanding why it didn't work the way you worked. Conferences sometimes can be very helpful with like-minded colleagues who think about the same issues, but probably from a different perspective, with different life experiences, and then can give you a bit of a feedback or suggestions of what went wrong, what can you do next time? So they can help with your own reflections. And at the end of the day, the ultimate goal can be, not need to be, but can be publishing your work potentially in a peer-reviewed journal, but it can be a collection in a book or wherever you think it is important to share the knowledge. Okay? Now, are there any questions so far? Think about it. You'll have a little bit more time to ask questions, at least I would like you to. But let's quickly go through the structure of the SOTL study. It's actually very similar to what we went through. But if you want to organize all of this knowledge into a paper, which we actually looked at in my other presentation more deeply, but I think if you want to go to the point where you want to publish, it would be important to know, right? It often starts some ways or another with a teaching challenge, right? That's kind of where we started. Describes the innovation, how it is informed by a theoretical framework or some concepts of teaching and learning. What the literature said about it, right? Why do you expect it to succeed? And this is also, if you're running a study that requires hypothesis or can accommodate hypothesis, this is also where you can put forward your hypothesis. Then you describe your data and methods to the extent that your study is replicable. So if someone else wants to do the same thing, they know how to do it. Okay? Then comes your results and the discussion of those results. It's important that you're not only saying that, the whatever coefficient is what, but you need to translate it to human language. So someone who knows nothing about statistics can still understand your paper and its significance. And then you go, what will be most likely your conclusion, the larger implication of your study, if there's some, what can be done in the future, what you will be doing in the future. These I think we already talked about. How am I going to change this innovation? How am I going to adapt it? How am I going to use this? And then perhaps you suggest future research or teaching, right? I reveal this important thing that I did not expect to think. I encourage people to look into it and study why this certain group of students did not react to this innovation the way that everyone expected in the literature. Okay? So those sort of things. So this is a very crude thing, but that's basically what you do. And of course, you do stick your references at the end of your paper if you don't want to quote with plagiarism and all those sort of nasty things. But we also want to demonstrate that you know that literature, right? So that's an important thing. Now, why do we do this SOTL study? Okay, we do want to learn about our teaching, right? So we do want to become a better teacher. But we don't necessarily need to write a SOTL study to be a better teacher. Okay. But I think it's important that we try at least once in our lives to write a SOTL study, because it helps us think more systematically about our teaching, even when we're not running a full-fledged research on it. Okay? You also start to be more sensitive to signs in the classroom, perhaps, of, oh, I lost that student. Oh my God, I lost the entire classroom. Okay? Hopefully that never happens, but okay. Of course, you want to improve your students' learning. And unfortunately, as the student body changes, so will you have opportunities to change your method of teaching. It's unlikely that, the student profiles stay the same even from one year to another, but certainly over a 20-year period of time, students grow up differently, they study differently, they perceive things differently, so most likely they learn differently, and that means you probably need to teach differently. It also helps you develop a reflective practice, a practice where you actually think about your teaching. And think about more deeply, not, torturing yourself, but more often going away with the classroom with the idea of it worked, it didn't work, it partially worked, and thinking about why and what can be done. It's also a way to connect with like-minded individuals if you go to the publish stage. Conferences are particularly good for that, but you can find your tribe at your university as well. Maybe in your department, maybe in another department, but that could be very important because you can exchange ideas and you can support each other. Someone who feels very lonely because in their department they are the only one who actually want to do something else than what has been done in the past 50 years can feel very lonely. So for you to keep up your enthusiasm, you actually have to find those people who share your enthusiasm, your thinking, and your inspiration to become a better teacher. And if you go and manage to publish your total study, you also advance your publishing record, which everyone at the university has some requirements of publications. If you're really smart about it and it really looks at a topic, that also your research field, then you don't have to sell it only as a teaching and learning study, but you can say it's a study about foreign policy and how people think about foreign policy, and particularly in the classroom. Okay? So you can connect it into your research practice if you want. So you can actually kill many birds with one stone if you want. Oh, I don't encourage killing birds though, okay? All right, now, the best inspiration is always reading Aristotle papers. You can always run into new methods that people did, new ways of, new kind of data, or a spin on that certain data. The questions that they probably ask from themselves in their teacher's diary. So I would recommend that the most obvious place to start with is journals of academic and educational development. That could be daunting because that's like a really big field, and if it's not your original field, say you're a historian, a political scientist, a sociologist, a psychologist, etc., maybe that's too big. Maybe you want to narrow it down a little. Go and check out disciplinary journals in your field. Okay, not all of them, but some of them publish teaching-related articles. And so that actually tells you what are the issues that excites your colleagues in your own field. And figure out how to connect to them, and maybe they can actually inform what you do or what you want to do in your innovation. Now, we had the fortune with Gabriella to work with two different groups of students of our courses who all wrote SOTL studies. These are the shorter ones, so if you're not up to 20-page articles, these usually go around at 9-ish or so. But it also can help you understand that you don't have to be some big shot to do this kind of thing. Many of them actually in the early career academics reflections, we basically had doctoral students only. Okay? It was very exciting to see what they are doing. The latest group, we actually publish it at a website, and now we're putting it together into a PDF from book as well. And Lenko actually wrote one of those studies. Those particularly focus on internationalization, but there you can also get some inspiration. You can actually look up and see if any of your colleagues, are involved. And if you like this study, say hi and tell them it's really good. It's actually a very nice feeling, someone actually noticing that you've done something. All right. Now, these are my reference lists used for this study. So, and then if you have any further questions or anything that you would like to share with your colleagues here today, feel free to go ahead.
I'm just want to say, because it's kind of like the obvious question I'm thinking about, can you do a study about something that doesn't work? Like deliberately looking for a method that will just confuse the student?
I'd say, okay, I think it's different. It's two different questions. Okay, you can do a study on something that you end up figuring out it doesn't work. From an ethical perspective, I would not recommend to deliberately do something where the students won't learn something. Okay, but especially, when you start your innovation and you're evaluating it, you don't know. I mean, you expect it to work. But it's just like any other research. You do all the things and you feel, oh, I don't have any findings that I can publish. But you can still do it. And if you do it for a course, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes you can actually learn more from those that didn't work than those that actually worked. But it's not a good idea to go into an innovation that you know it won't work. Or the literature, unless your setup is the literature says it won't work, and I think it will in this particular circumstance. Okay? But then you have to be really sure, because what you're playing with is your students' learning. Other question?
Yeah, I would like to ask about the ethical aspect of conducting a social study. Well, I attempted to do several last year during our how to teach anatomy course, and I asked my students, just verbally, is it okay if I do a study? And most of them nodded yes, and so on. But I did not get it in writing, things like that. Now, how does it work usually? What's your experience with these sort of things, especially if you are a doctoral student who wants to attempt a social study?
I don't. That's okay. That's actually many questions in one. I don't think that your status at the university influences it much. Normally, if you want to get ethical approval for it, you fill out a document that the ethical committee has for everyone, provide the documentation that they require, and then they basically say it's okay or it's not okay, or they need to adapt or something. But part of it is a consent form that you want your students to sign. Now, there's a catch here, which they can refuse. And the question is, what do you do with that student who refused? You have 30 agreeing, 1 refusing. You can use the data, it's fine. You know which student perhaps it is, right? So you're not using your assignment, you're not using your grades. But whenever it comes to anonym information, you will not be able to differentiate. But exactly because the information is anonym, you're fine. Okay? But the consent form is an important thing. For me, and I'll turn it over to Gabi. For me, when I did my board gaming, there were some students who did not want to do the board gaming at all, so I had to offer an alternative assignment. I think the alternative assignment wasn't bad, but was not nearly as exciting as the other. But maybe they didn't have a free afternoon because I had to do it outside of the classroom. So they had the chance to do it. If you're doing it in the classroom, it's kind of a bit different. But the question is whether they are not consenting to, say, playing a board game, or they are just not consenting to you collecting data. Because you normally don't go out and say, hey, I'm going to teach differently, right? But for me, it was obvious because board games are usually not done in political science classrooms. Okay, Gabi?
Just briefly, I'm on the Faculty of Arts Ethical Council, so you can quite easily fill out the form and then submit it to the Ethical Council. We usually decide in 30 days and much faster if it's not a complicated issue. So no worries, this can be solved. And I think then your students could be making sure that this is not any harmful experiment on them, but it helps their learning. And I think this can enhance their understanding of all.
So I was wondering if I do a survey, if I can add like a formula at the very end of the survey, like hereby I consent or I give my consent these data to be processed. Can that work like consent from the student?
That's the usual procedure. That's what
Yes.
without it, you cannot move ahead. Basically, you need explicit consent from all researchers.
But you would want to put it at the beginning,
Or in the end,
right? So basically, if you don't actually don't fill it out. But yes,
if you
so
do
you want.
survey, it can be in the air because they
yeah, that's why I was thinking at the end of the
full
whole
information.
Yeah.
And even in paper form, you provide full information about your research, and then you say, hereby I declare that I provide my informed consent and your name and signature.
So then it will be in the
You
Actually,
you can keep the informed consent for everyone, but you will not treat the data that you collect from them with their names, like you will not pair this.
Other questions? If not, I would like to thank you for your attention. And I probably return the floor to Sluska.
Just Aggie, thank you very much for this whole workshop and this information. I think also those of you who already had the opportunity to know something from Aggie's work and something about Soto, I think this was enriching and you found out many new things. But we will be curious about your feedback, so we can chat a bit and you can use our refreshment a little bit after this workshop. So thank you very much everyone for being here today, and I will be looking forward to meet you on other workshops in March, April, May, and so on. So thank you very much, and thank you for your participation.